An unspoiled landscape, a searing sun, the serene sounds of nature, suddenly disturbed by the crackle of a walkie-talkie.
Hello, Two Forks Tower.
Firewatch lingers in your mind, even long after you've played it. It makes you feel like you've spent the summer of 1989 working as a fire lookout, bonding with a stranger over the radio.
It's Henry, right?
Yeah.
I'm Delilah.
But what makes Firewatch so memorable? And why, even 10 years later, is there still no experience like it? Well, that's due to Campo Santo's unique approach to game design. This small team created a game so impressive it convinced Valve to buy their entire studio. And while plenty of narrative-focused adventure games have come out over the past decade, none have managed to match Firewatch. This video will explain why.
Hello, Henry. Having a nice afternoon?
I might never leave.
So, in Firewatch, you play as Henry, who takes up a summer job as a fire lookout in the Shoshone National Forest in Wyoming. Henry spends most of his time talking to his supervisor, Delilah, over the radio. This dialogue system is the core of Firewatch. Henry's relationship with Delilah evolves based on what the player says and does. Now, Firewatch got rave reviews when it released back in 2016. The game was praised for its immersive atmosphere, natural dialogue, and grounded, believable characters. This is a bigger achievement than it sounds, because Firewatch isn't realistic in the slightest.
No!
You see, during development, Campo Santo spent time researching the story by interviewing several fire lookouts about their jobs. And they quickly discovered that there's a reason why no one had ever made a game about being a fire lookout before.
The main takeaway from whenever we would talk to someone who had done this job is, why would you make a game about that? That is the most boring time of my entire life.
Turns out, a fire lookout spends most of their time in their tower, staring at the horizon and reading a truckload of books. Not exactly the makings of an exciting video game. So, Campo Santo could either tell a realistic story or an exciting one. Their choice was obvious. Henry spends a lot of time adventuring outside of his tower, pretty much the opposite of what a fire lookout is paid to do. The concept that the game is built around is also unrealistic. Real fire lookouts used their radios sparingly, and having a private conversation is pretty much impossible, as there are always other people listening in. The team did experiment with gameplay mechanics that are part of a fire lookout's day-to-day work, but these were eventually cut, as they only distracted from the story Campo Santo wanted to tell.
They might have created a more believable depiction of a fire lookout if that's actually what we were attempting to create, but it wasn't.
The same goes for the game's art style. One of Campo Santo's co-founders is Ollie Moss, a self-taught graphics designer best known for his minimalistic reimaginings of movie posters. He was approached by Jake Rodkin and Sean Veneman, the creative leads behind Telltale Games' The Walking Dead. Shortly after the release of Season 1, Jake and Sean had decided to leave Telltale and form their own studio. The idea behind Firewatch mainly came from Sean. He had spent his childhood in rural Wyoming and wanted to share those experiences with the world. Ollie would turn those feelings into this image, which would become Firewatch's key art, serving as the game's blueprint throughout development. A lonely fire lookout tower is surrounded by wilderness. The sun is setting, its orange and red tones conveying a sense of mystery. The second tower stands far into the distance, visible but out of reach. Now, creating an image that represents what playing Firewatch should feel like is one thing, but it's another to, turn it into a functioning video game.
Okay, now I'm ready.
Ollie's art is inherently very stylized, but Campo Santo wanted Firewatch to feel grounded and immersive. Two seemingly incompatible ideas. For example, when Ollie created this image, he relied purely on his imagination, as he had never even seen the American wilderness with his own eyes. This was a problem. As Sean explains, in the first 6 months, when Ollie would draw the terrain, it just didn't feel like the American West. So, Campo Santo organized a camping trip to a US national park. They didn't visit the actual Shoshone National Forest, mind you. They chose Yosemite, close to the studio's office in San Francisco, but around 1,000 kilometers from where Firewatch actually takes place. But that distance didn't really matter. Jane Ng, who worked with Ollie to transform his art into a three-dimensional world, explains it best.
We are trying to evoke, not necessarily recreate, a piece of wilderness in the Shoshone National Forest in Wyoming.
Firewatch doesn't need to accurately depict the life of a fire lookout or painstakingly recreate the Shoshone National Forest to be believable. All that matters is that it feels real. And if you've played Firewatch, you'll know that it does.
What do you know?
I know that I'm scared.
Now, you might be wondering, how does Firewatch manage to feel so real? Well, the answer is simple. Firewatch is designed to avoid breaking the player's suspension of disbelief. But before we can understand how the game does that, we need to take a look back at Jake and Sean's career before Campo Santo. Because Firewatch didn't just appear out of thin air. It is the result of an evolution that began in the early 2000s, with the founding of Telltale Games.
Quit moving around so much, bobblehead.
When are we gonna get another case, Sam?
Telltale Games was founded by several former LucasArts developers. Back in the 90s, this studio created some of the best adventure games of all time. These were known as point and clicks, as you control your character by, pointing and clicking. But in the new millennium, adventure games were seen as boring and antiquated. So LucasArts decided to leave the genre behind entirely, doubling down on action games and the Star Wars license instead. We all know how that turned out. Many LucasArts developers saw the writing on the wall and left to form their own studios, the most famous of which are Double Fine and Telltale Games. While Double Fine branched out to other genres, the folks at Telltale wanted to continue making adventure games. Jake and Sean joined the studio a few years later, cutting their teeth on games like Wallace and Gromit and Tales of Monkey Island. These were Telltale's first attempts at bringing the adventure game genre into the 21st century, giving players 3D worlds to explore and releasing in an episodic format.
Holy screaming starfish!
But at their core, these games were still point and clicks. While working on these projects, Jake and Sean had identified several key issues that prevented adventure games from telling engaging stories, holding the genre back from mass appeal. For one, players don't feel like they're actively participating in the story the game is telling. In a point and click, you are essentially a god, watching over the main character from above and telling them what to do. This physical distance also creates an emotional distance between the player and the main character, making it harder to get invested in the narrative. Second, point and clicks never managed to find an elegant way to implement consequences to the player's actions. In many old adventure games, if you make the wrong choice, you die. Some even softlock you if you missed an item in an earlier section. These failure states tell the player they played the game incorrectly, and the only way to continue is to replay the game the way its developers intended.
Oh, sorry, Ted. Try again.
LucasArts found this mechanic too punishing, which is why most of their games don't have failure states at all. But that leads to another problem. When the stakes of the story ramp up,
the shuttle is the last hope of the human race.
The player knows that they can't fail, removing any tension the story tries to introduce. The only real friction LucasArts point and clicks offer is through their puzzles, but many of these puzzles have intentionally nonsensical solutions to extend the game's playtime, most commonly known as moon logic. This puzzle in Monkey Island 2 is a notorious example. Protagonist Guybrush Threepwood needs to get to the other side of this waterfall.
Very picturesque.
Which is powered by a pump. So maybe there's some kind of tool nearby that you can use to turn off. You need to find an envelope containing a banana, go to a bar, find a monkey playing the piano, hypnotize the monkey by putting the banana on a metronome, place the monkey in your inventory, sail back and use the monkey to turn off the pump. Because you need a monkey wrench. Get it? it's okay if you don't, because this puzzle relies on the player knowing what a monkey wrench is, a term only commonly used in certain parts of the United States. So, the majority of players will either solve this puzzle with trial and error, or by looking up a guide. Neither of which are particularly satisfying. And even if you manage to figure out the wordplay, the puzzle still doesn't make any logical sense. Its only purpose is to break the fourth wall and tell a joke to the player. This all makes it very hard to get invested in the story of a point and click. The limits of the genre constantly break the player's suspension of disbelief.
What's this doing in a pirate game?
After releasing its early adventure games, Telltale felt it was ready to shake up the genre. The small team started prototyping a narrative-driven zombie game, meant to be set in the Left 4 Dead universe, but Telltale never came to an agreement with Valve. The studio then managed to secure a deal with Walking Dead creator Robert Kirkman, who was a fan of Telltale's earlier games. Jake and Sean would become co-directors of the project, handling its design and narrative. The goal was simple: to bring adventure games into the modern age. For one, The Walking Dead brings the player closer to the action. You are in direct control of the protagonist, Lee, controlling him with the keyboard or joystick instead of a cursor. And the game is full of cinematic camera angles, from wide shots to close-ups and everything in between. Second, The Walking Dead does not contain any moon logic. The game's 5 episodes feature just a handful of easy puzzles. They're not designed to throw a monkey wrench in your progress. They only serve as a short break from the heavy storyline.
You fixed it.
Finally, you can't just lean back and put the controller down during a cutscene, because an important quick-time event could occur at any moment. Dialogue trees force you to pick the right choice before the timer runs out, and the wrong response could impact Lee's relationship with the other characters. It's hard to convey just how groundbreaking The Walking Dead Season 1 was back in 2012. It won over 80 Game of the Year awards. It made adventure games cool again, and it helped lay the foundation for the genre's cinematic, choice-driven future. Without The Walking Dead, there would be no Until Dawn, no Life is Strange, no Dispatch. But that doesn't mean that Jake and Sean were completely satisfied with the end result. Despite their best efforts, there are still times where the game breaks the player's suspension of disbelief. You see, every Telltale game opens with the same line. This game series adapts to the choices you make. The story is tailored by how you play. The success of The Walking Dead Season 1 and that of Telltale games as a whole depended on the player believing this. But as the studio released more games, people began to notice that pretty much everything in a Telltale game is smoke and mirrors. Consider The Walking Dead's numerous QuickTime events. They are meant to improve the game's pacing by breaking up the many non-interactive cutscenes and to add an extra layer of tension. But this tension is a lie, because failing a QuickTime event doesn't have any real consequences. It simply results in a game over screen.
Are you dead too?
Immediately breaking the player's immersion. The game's choices are often an illusion as well. In this early scene in episode 1, you can either save Herschel's son, Sean, or Kenny's son, Duck. Except, no matter what choice you make, Sean dies and Duck survives. And even if you choose to abandon Duck and insult Kenny,
if Kenny had helped, his son would be alive.
He'll still give you a ride to the game's next location. The Walking Dead Season 1 was most people's first introduction to Telltale, so everyone bought into the illusion. But it's a trick that only works once. Jake and Sean were very aware of the limits of the game they had made. In an interview about 6 months after the launch of Season 1, Sean says that preserving that suspension of disbelief and preserving the real, genuine intensity of those dramatic moments is the focus. If people start being able to see the machinations, the goings-on behind the curtain, then we'll have to adapt. But Telltale's executives refused to do so. Creative doubts were drowned out by dollar signs. The studio ballooned in size, licensing every famous franchise under the sun to fit them into the mold of The Walking Dead. results were mixed, and even the best games didn't come close to Season 1's success. Just 6 years after The Walking Dead Season 1, Telltale Games filed for bankruptcy. If Telltale didn't want to adapt, Jake and Sean would do it themselves. So instead of making Season 2, the duo left the studio to found Campo Santo and create Firewatch. While their stories couldn't be more different, in many ways Firewatch is a continuation of what Jake and Sean set out to do with The Walking Dead Season 1. Creating a narrative-driven, choice-based adventure game that strives to maintain the player's suspension of disbelief at all times. First off, many Telltale games are hampered by stiff animations and facial expressions, which can easily break your immersion. Firewatch sidesteps this problem completely by switching to a first-person perspective. As a result, it holds up far better than any Telltale game, even those that came out after Firewatch. Campo Santo did realize that with the player not having a visual focus for the dialogue, the voice acting would make or break the story they wanted to tell. It had to be perfect.
Dee, just don't freak out, okay? Don't freak out.
Oh my god, what the fuck is happening, Henry?
So they hired two of the best voice actors they could find. Cissy Jones, who played several roles in The Walking Dead Season 1, and Rich Sommer, best known from the prestige TV series Mad Men. Now, for most video games, voice actors record their dialogue alone. The developers later take their lines and stitch them together, which is why voice acting in games can often feel a bit stilted or unnatural.
So you won't tell me where it is? No.
To ensure that wouldn't happen in Firewatch, Campo Santo tried to recreate the circumstances of the story as best they could. As Henry and Delilah only speak to each other over a walkie-talkie, Cissy and Rich would record their lines together over a conference call. They hadn't met beforehand and had no idea what the other person looked like. Campo Santo even made a point of recording the dialogue chronologically. This awkward introduction between Henry and Delilah is made so much more believable because Cissy and Rich are getting to know each other at the same time.
Hello? Whoever this is?
It's Henry, right?
Yeah.
I'm Delilah.
Thanks to this unique recording method, the conversations in Firewatch feel incredibly realistic.
There are, panties?
There are what?
I don't want to say that word again.
Why, 'cause you're 12?
Campo Santo also went out of their way to make Firewatch's gameplay mechanics as immersive as possible. For one, the entire game takes place in an open world, without any loading screens. As you play through the game, you get to know the Shoshone National Forest just as Henry would. You can't follow a marker pointing you to the objective either. In Firewatch, you have to use your compass and look at your paper map. In the prototyping stage of Firewatch, these features were actually a lot more expansive. At one point, you were able to use this fire-finding table to spot fires. The map system was also much more complex, requiring you to triangulate your position to navigate. But these features were cut. Being able to spot fires wouldn't contribute anything to the story Campo Santo is trying to tell. Firewatch doesn't even have a dedicated jump button for the same reason.
Would it be cool to jump around the world? Maybe, but like, what does it mean? And what is it actually doing for the story is another matter. So then we don't need it.
So, both Firewatch's conversation and gameplay mechanics are built to be as immersive as possible, in service of the game's narrative. But a story needs stakes to be interesting. It might seem that The Walking Dead has the upper hand here. I mean, in the first 15 minutes of the game, Lee narrowly escapes death several times. But The Walking Dead's high stakes actually make the game less immersive. It has the same problem as those old point and clicks we talked about earlier. Lee can die, but isn't allowed to. As soon as you make a mistake, a game over screen breaks your suspension of disbelief. Another problem with The Walking Dead is how it presents its high stakes. Take this scene, for example. You watch Lee hear people shouting for help. You watch him awkwardly run towards the characters being attacked. You then press a button to choose the character you want to save, and watch as the consequences of your choice play out. Other than the binary Sean or Duck choice, there is no room for player expression. The stakes in Firewatch are a lot lower, especially in the beginning. Its first chapter has Henry go for a hike to look for some teens who are setting off fireworks. The game also doesn't have a fail state. There are no real puzzles, and Henry can't die. And yet, Firewatch isn't boring, thanks to the game's defining feature. It's reactivity.
Maybe we call it the Flapjack Fire. Can you sell that as a name?
Let's look at the fireworks chapter as an example. There are no cutscenes. You are in control of Henry at all times. And once you come face to face with the teens, the game reacts to how you decide to act.
Oh boy, enjoy dealing with that.
You can politely apologize for intruding.
Look, I'm sorry for bothering you.
You can hurl insults at them.
Hey, you fucking kids!
You can just stare.
Why do guys think it's alright to just stare at girls?
You can pick up their radio.
Full stereo!
Whoa, hey, put that down!
Put it down again.
You probably have a tiny dick!
Or take it with you to your lookout tower.
Wow, the music's a little loud.
Oh, sorry, I took their stereo.
The game also takes into account what you do before you meet the teens. You can tell them if you decided to leave their stuff alone.
I left all your stuff back there.
Or if you stole their whiskey.
Well, I took your whiskey.
What?
Consequences of your actions also appear in dialogue options down the line. For example, during this playthrough, I chose to throw their stereo in the lake. Later in the game, when you come across the teens' campsite, you can tell Delilah you destroyed their stuff, and she'll respond with unique dialogue.
I just threw their stereo in the lake.
Yeah, I really wish you wouldn't have done that.
Speaking of, the way you talk to Delilah shapes your relationship with her. If you decide to tell her about your struggling marriage,
I'm actually married.
Delilah will continually address that topic throughout the entire game.
So, how'd you meet?
But you can also decide you don't want her to know about your personal life, in which case she'll gradually open up about her own relationship troubles.
So, a couple of months before I took this job, I was with this guy, Javier.
While Firewatch encourages you to get close to Delilah, it doesn't force you. You can be rude to her.
Hey D, I don't want to harsh your vibe, but maybe, just maybe, that's a bad idea.
Call her out for acting suspicious.
What was that? Were you talking about me?
Or give her the silent treatment.
Well, look, if you can hear me, try to get back soon, okay?
Like in real life, this will affect how she responds to you, and even have her ignore you during certain sections of the game. This reactivity is ingrained in Campo Santo's design philosophy. Sean describes it as going on a date with the player. In order for the date to go well, the game has to listen and respond to what the player says and does. Playing The Walking Dead is like going on a date with someone who monologues the entire evening, only stopping to ask you the occasional yes or no question. Firewatch, meanwhile, lets you do the talking. If you want to take the date analogy even further, The Walking Dead also comes across as a bit insecure, incessantly reminding you that your choices have consequences, even if they don't always do. Firewatch lets you discover those consequences on your own. It exudes a quiet confidence, maybe a bit too quiet. 5 years after its release, Firewatch game designer and composer Chris Remo said that, "In some ways, we were probably too subtle for our own good, because I think a lot of players perceive the game to be completely linear and their choices to not matter at all." This is in large part due to Firewatch's most controversial feature, its ending. If you haven't played Firewatch yet and don't want to be spoiled, you should skip ahead to the next chapter. So, Firewatch's big narrative hook is that over the course of the summer, Henry and Delilah stumble onto a conspiracy. They discover they're being listened to. Someone breaks into Henry's tower. And later, Henry discovers a monitoring camp and even gets attacked. But the game eventually reveals that all this was one giant red herring. Henry and Delilah's stalker ends up being a grieving father, and the camp was set up by a couple of scientists. Henry also never comes face to face with Delilah. Whatever choices you make throughout the game, she'll always leave the forest before you get to her tower. Now, thematically, these anticlimaxes make sense. Henry and Delilah became fire lookouts so they could run away from their old lives. Henry didn't know how to face his wife's dementia, while Delilah couldn't commit to her long-term partner.
I lied to you. I came out here with a broken heart just like you.
In the end, they both realized that the conspiracy and their relationship were just distractions they invented to avoid dealing with their problems.
Look, you came out to put your memories behind you, and they're still right there in front of you.
This ending also subverts the players' expectations. They bought into the game as a mystery thriller and got invested in Henry and Delilah's relationship. Just like Firewatch's main characters, its players are looking for an escape, but end up facing reality. As you can imagine, this ending is very divisive. Some people love it, others hate it. Everyone has an opinion about it. And I think this speaks to just how strong Firewatch is in immersing you into its world and its characters. Why do millions of people watch video essays about Firewatch's ending? Why do they get tattoos or profess their love for Delilah online? Because they care. And while Firewatch's ending is set in stone, that doesn't mean your choices are meaningless. They serve as a way for the player to express how Henry thinks about his job, his marriage, or Delilah. Through these decisions, each player is essentially building their own version of Henry in their head. Through this reactivity, Firewatch sets itself apart. It's the natural conclusion from an evolution that started with the rigid, inflexible adventure games from the 90s, to The Walking Dead's binary yes or no choices, to a game that truly responds to how you decide to play.
It's done.
Well, that's ominous.
But that leaves us with another question. Firewatch is now over 10 years old. Why has no other game managed to recapture its magic? Well, barely any games have attempted to step into Firewatch's footsteps, and those that do take inspiration from Campo Santo's first game tend to fall short in some way. For starters, there are games like Fierce to Fathom, Ironbark Lookout, and Radiolight. These games are obviously inspired by Firewatch's setting, but that's where the similarities end. They are first and foremost horror experiences, with jump scares and monsters chasing you. Some games feature dialogue systems clearly inspired by Firewatch. However, these just don't feel as immersive. Road 96, for example, suffers from janky animations. Killer Frequency is a parody of a 1980s slasher horror movie. And South of the Circle is more of an interactive movie than a video game. Then there are the walking simulators. Games like Gone Home, Dear Esther, Tacoma, What Remains of Edith Finch. While many of the games in this genre were made years before Campo Santo was founded, they are often recommended to Firewatch fans looking for a similar experience. They're in first person, narrative driven, and have some kind of mystery to uncover. But the way these games tell their stories is fundamentally different from Firewatch. In a traditional walking sim, the player is dropped into a static world, where everything important has already happened, and the story is told through journals, or audio logs. This is completely different to how Campo Santo built Firewatch.
The desire for the story to be told largely in the present tense, not the past tense, was important if we wanted to really believably immerse the player inside of the story itself.
In most walking sims, you're an archaeologist.
The table was still a wreck from the night we left.
In Firewatch, you're a participant.
I smashed open the gate. Should I try to fix or hide this?
No, screw it.
Okay then.
The Invincible is perhaps the game that resembles Firewatch the most, but it stumbles in a few small ways. And in doing so, it shows why it's so difficult to repeat what Campo Santo did. The Invincible is a retro sci-fi adventure game that puts you in the boots of Dr. Yasna, an astrobiologist who wakes up on the planet Regis 3 without knowing how she got there. Your mission is to find and rescue your crew members while uncovering the mystery of this uncharted planet. Comparisons to Firewatch are easily made. You're traversing a stunning but desolate landscape. There are no menus or map markers. You navigate with the help of a physical map. Most importantly, the main gameplay mechanic is talking to your supervisor, Commander Novik, over the radio. Just like Firewatch, you can talk to him by pointing out objects or occurrences in the world. But as I played through the Invincible, I began noticing more and more quirks that kept breaking my suspension of disbelief. For example, it's often not clear if Dr. Jasna is thinking something, talking to herself out loud, or saying something to Novik, because the radio mouthpiece is always in view.
On some planets, such storms last for several hundred days.
This is never a source of confusion in Firewatch. You can't hear Henry's thoughts, and it's always clear when he's speaking to Delilah. The button that lets you speak to her also physically brings up the walkie-talkie, and when the conversation is over, Henry puts it away again. The Invincible's dialogue system also behaves in weird ways. Like here, Novik pauses halfway through a sentence.
I have everything I need, just...
spurring you to ask what the problem is. There's a timer, but it only counts down when you physically move. And there's only one dialogue option, with the other two buttons grayed out, making it even more obvious you don't have a choice in what to say. You also can't ignore Novik. I decided to let the timer run out, and the game wound up selecting the only option available to me anyway.
Just what?
Well...
Sometimes Novik stops talking halfway through a sentence.
The artifact turned out to be too big to dig up.
Or a spoken line is cut short because you ran too fast and triggered the next one.
It's like we own the place because of this kind of attitude. This route may be faster.
Other times, the game reacts too slowly to your actions, like here, where you're following the tracker of a crewmate.
I've got Gorski's signal.
So soon? It's unlikely to be him.
Then who? You were correct, sir. It's just our probe.
Firewatch never shows you more dialogue options than you have access to. Staying silent is a valid option. And Campo Santo painstakingly tested spoken lines by speedrunning quest objectives. If the dialogue was cut off, the line was deemed too long, and the team would edit it down until it fit. Now, I'm not saying the Invincible is a bad game because of these flaws. They're quite small in the grand scheme of things. But they show just how difficult it is to consistently maintain the player's suspension of disbelief, when even the tiniest mistake or oversight can break it. Perhaps then, Firewatch was lightning in a bottle, because not even Campo Santo has managed to make a true successor. They announced their next game, In the Valley of Gods, in 2017. Soon after, they were bought by Valve, and the project was put on hold. After all, Valve bought Campo Santo for a reason. They needed help with building Half-Life Alyx. Campo Santo's mark on Half-Life Alyx is clearly visible. Sean joined the game's writing team and ended up co-writing the entire story. Ollie created art assets and even drew the original sketch for what would become the game's key art. Jake and Chris helped out with the game design, and Jane worked on the Gravity Glove, which enables the player to mess around with the game's many interactable objects. In Half-Life Alyx's developer commentary, Jane says,
"One of our core goals with Half-Life Alyx was to allow players to fully immerse themselves by ceasing to think about what they were doing in real life."
Sound familiar? At the time of making this video, the development of In the Valley of Gods is still on hold, while Jake, Sean and Ollie are still working for Valve in some capacity. Jane and Chris left the studio in the years after the release of Half-Life Alyx. Other Campo Santo employees never even joined Valve, going their own way before the acquisition. Barring a miracle, it doesn't seem that we're ever going to get another Campo Santo game. But Firewatch isn't going anywhere. Even though it's over a decade old, there still isn't anything like it. So if you're watching this video and you haven't played Firewatch yet, go play it. And if you have, I recommend playing through it another time. Go roleplay as an alcoholic Henry, do an entire playthrough ignoring Delilah, or steal the food of other lookouts. game only takes a few hours to complete, and through its reactivity, you might just get a new sense of appreciation for just how special Firewatch truly is.
Hey, you didn't take all of the supply drop food, did you?
Thank you very much for watching.